Hi, it's time. No good. Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is yawn. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way the verb yawn is most commonly used is to mean to involuntarily open one's mouth wide and inhale deeply. Right? So this first definition might look a little bit like this. Right? So commonly, this involuntary motion is, or happens, I should say, when one is tired or maybe even bored. So kind of not too interested in what's happening. And some say that it can even be contagious. So when we see one person yawn, we might also sort of mimic that same behavior. A second way the verb yawn gets used is to mean to have an opening or a space that is very large and wide. You might see this used more commonly in literature as somebody is trying to describe a particular space. I've got an example sentence a little later in this video that will match this second definition. But first, you should know that yawn is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I'm going to do is add ing to form yawning. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Now, our base verb, yawn, ends with a voice sound. The consonant N sound is voiced. And this means that the ed ending is just going to make a D sound. And I'm not adding an extra syllable as I say it. So it should sound like this. Yawned, yawned. Okay. Now, there aren't any phrasal verbs that we need to study, so now we can move on to practicing our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the simple past tense and the simple present. Let's start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to describe actions that were completed at a known point in the past. Sometimes in simple past tense sentences, there are time signals. Words like yesterday, last week, or maybe even a specific date in the past. But I want you to know that's not going to happen in every sentence because that could become a little boring and repetitive. It could eventually make you want to have this action if we kept repeating the time period. So it can be implied as part of a conversation or as part of a longer text. Now, the nice thing about the simple past tense is that our structure is going to be the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative or in positive sentences, we start with our subject and then we use that ed form of our verb. You can see this in my example sentence. The canyon yawned at the traveler's feet. Okay. Here's an example sentence that ties back to that second meaning, a very large, open, wide space. Okay. Now let's look at making negative simple past tense sentences. To do this, again, doesn't matter what my subject is. I start with my subject, I use did, not, and then the base verb. I always like to point out to my students, notice I'm not adding an ed here in the negative. I go back to the base verb. Here's another example sentence. The students didn't yawn while I was explaining passive voice verbs. Okay? That always feels like an accomplishment. That is not the most exciting of grammar topics, at least in my experience in teaching. So that was a good day. Now let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, I start with did, then I have my subject, and then the base verb. So again, no ed here in my yes or no question. Here's another example. Did she yawn while the judge was speaking? right? Oh, that might be a bad sort of moment to do it. So sometimes, and it can happen to everyone again, because this reaction, this action is many times involuntary. But in certain meetings, classes, right, those can be not so great moments to, right, have that involuntary action. Now let's talk about the simple present. We use this verb tense to describe actions that are habits or routine, something that's going to repeat again at kind of a common frequency. So here, I do need to pay attention to my subject. In the affirmative, if my subject is I, you, we, or they, then I just use the base verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, then I need to add an S to the end of my verb. And you can see this here. I have the example sentence, the baby always yawns just before bedtime. So here's an action that repeats again and again. And I'm talking about one baby here, right? So you can see that S on the end of my verb. If I was talking about several or just two or more babies, right? I would say the babies always yawn. I'd take off that S. Okay. Now let's look at negative simple present sentences. To do this, again, I pay attention to my subject. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, then I use do not and then the base verb. You might also hear the contraction don't and then the base verb. Now, if the subject is he, she, or it, then I use does not and the base verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Whales and dolphins don't yawn. Okay. So here, whales and dolphins, I'm talking about large groups of animals here, right? So that's going to be like saying they. That's why you see don't yawn. And I believe this is a factual statement. I tried to find some examples of different animals that don't have this involuntary reaction, right? And that's another reason people use the simple present to discuss facts. Okay. Now let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, I start with do or does, then I have my subject, and then the base verb. So again, notice the only time I'm adding an S to the end of the verb is in the affirmative with positive sentences when my subject is he, she, or it. So my yes or no question is, do you yawn frequently? Right? So here I'm asking about your habit, your routine as it relates to this action. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb yawn. And the first thing we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So, same spelling, right? And same pronunciation. Sometimes, as we discuss this noun, yawn, we might be referring to the act or the action of opening one's mouth sort of wide and inhaling deeply. So I've got a little picture there in case my demonstration earlier wasn't very good, right? I have this adorable baby, right? And go, oh, we might say that was a big yawn, right? So sometimes there's a very wide opening as we do it. But another way you hear the noun yawn used is to describe something that is really boring or tedious. An example of that noun in a sentence might be, the movie we watched was such a yawn, right? This is a way to say I found it boring, I wasn't interested, maybe I was hoping it would end soon, but it kept going on, right? So that's not a compliment. Now, another related noun you might encounter is yawner, right? And again, this gets used rather informally to refer to things that are very, very boring. Okay, so sometimes a particular game, maybe you were excited to watch some kind of sporting event, but it turned out to be really boring. So you might hear somebody say, tonight's game was a yawner, right? So you can use yawn or yawner to describe anything that's rather boring. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you haven't yawned while watching. But I do hope you have a wonderful day.